All right, so we're back for another deep dive. And today it's all about making those community building ideas actually happen.
Yeah, getting out of the theoretical and into the practical.
Exactly. And I know you've been digging into this handbook, Roots of Resilience. It seems to lay out a whole roadmap for implementation. What's got you excited about it?
Honestly, it's just so practical. It gives you this step-by-step guide for launching these pilot projects, which I think is really important. It makes the whole thing feel much less intimidating.
Okay, I like that. So if someone's inspired, ready to go, where do they even begin?
Well, the handbook is all about starting small. Focusing on those quick wins. What's a need that the community feels right now? Like something that can be addressed fairly quickly and you can actually see results.
Yeah, not trying to solve every problem at once.
Right, exactly. So it could be something like, organizing a neighborhood cleanup day or setting up one of those pop-up composting stations. The key is it's tangible, right? People see the benefit, they get excited.
Okay, that makes sense. But even for a small project, you need people to actually do the work.
Oh, for sure. And the handbook talks about that, about putting together these volunteer teams.
Yeah.
But it's not just about getting a bunch of people who mean well.
Right, there's got to be some structure.
Exactly. It emphasizes defining specific roles. Even for a pilot, you need like a project leader to keep things on track. You need someone handling communications, keeping everybody informed, someone to coordinate all the resources, and even a data collector.
Data collection for a small pilot project.
I know it sounds like overkill, but even small projects can generate data that can help you demonstrate impact, which then builds trust, shows stakeholders what you've accomplished, and can really help you refine things for future projects.
So it's not about complex data analysis, more like simple metrics that tell a story.
Exactly, like how many volunteers participated, how much waste did you divert from landfill. Those numbers can tell a powerful story.
And speaking of stories, the handbook also emphasizes that, right? The power of storytelling.
Absolutely. Data is important, but it's the human stories that stick with people. Those anecdotes, the unexpected moments, the challenges that were overcome, that's what brings a project to life.
Right. It makes it relatable. It connects with people's heart.
Exactly. So you've got your pilot running, you're collecting data, sharing stories. What happens next? How do you actually learn from the experience?
That's where Imagine the Lessons Learned come in.
You got it. It's about taking the time to reflect. What worked? What could be improved? Were there any surprising insights?
So it's like a debrief, but focused on extracting those valuable lessons for future projects.
Exactly. The handbook has this great anecdote about a cleanup initiative that saw way higher participation just by providing reusable gloves.
It's amazing how the smallest things can make a big difference.
Right. And these lessons learned basically become this library of wisdom that the community can use moving forward. It helps avoid those common pitfalls, replicate successes. It's about fostering that culture of continuous learning.
I love that idea, this kind of living library of community knowledge. So we've got results, we're gathering data, sharing stories, capturing those lessons learned. Is this where things can start to scale up?
It is. And the handbook actually dives into some really inspiring case studies of communities that have done just that. They've navigated this whole journey and offer a lot of practical insights for scaling impact.
Yeah, the case studies are one of my favorite parts. They really bring those concepts to life. Are there any that stand out to you?
Absolutely. 3 come to mind: Mondragon in Spain, Transition Town Totnes in the UK, and then the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement in Sri Lanka. All different approaches, but all centered around community well-being.
Okay, I remember those names in the handbook, but remind me, what's so unique about Mondragon?
So Mondragon is this amazing network of worker-owned cooperatives that's been going strong for decades. What sets them apart is they prioritize community well-being right alongside profit.
Wait, so it's not just about making money, but how that money is used to benefit the whole community.
Precisely. They invest in things like local development, education, social services, cultural initiatives. They've created this really integrated system where the success of the individual is completely tied to the well-being of the collective.
That's pretty remarkable. So Mondragon shows us that building a strong community can go hand in hand with building a strong local economy.
What about Transition Town Totnes? What's their story?
Totnes is all about tackling climate change at the local level, showing that grassroots efforts can actually make a difference.
Okay, so they're putting those ideas into action.
Yeah, they've got local currencies, renewable energy projects, community gardens, resilient food systems, all showing that a more sustainable and self-sufficient future is possible.
It's like they're taking ownership, saying, we can do this ourselves.
Exactly, and they've managed to do it while also creating a thriving local economy. So it challenges that assumption that economic growth and environmental sustainability have to be at odds. So Mondragon gives us a blueprint for economic resilience, and Totnes shows us how to build a community that's both economically and environmentally sustainable. What about the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement? What makes them stand out?
The Sarvodaya Shramadana movement in Sri Lanka is really interesting because it's so deeply rooted in Buddhist principles and Gandhian philosophy.
Okay, so there's a strong spiritual and ethical foundation there.
Absolutely. And they've really empowered these rural communities through sustainable agriculture, self-governance, and this huge emphasis on compassion and cooperation.
It sounds like they're not just building a community, but a way of life.
Yeah, it's pretty inspiring. One of their most impactful things has been these village-level savings and credit cooperatives. They give people access to financial resources so villagers can invest in their farms, businesses, their education.
It's like grassroots economic empowerment, lifting up entire communities from within.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But okay, let's be real for a second. Even with the best plans, there will be roadblocks. The handbook talks about some common obstacles. What are some of those and how do we navigate them?
Yeah, because challenges are inevitable.
Oh, definitely. And the handbook offers some great strategies for overcoming them. One of the biggest is leadership burnout. It's so easy to pour your heart into these projects and just get overwhelmed.
It makes sense. So how do you prevent that burnout and keep those leaders energized?
The handbook is all about delegating, spreading the workload so no one person is carrying too much.
By sharing the load and making sure everyone feels valued and supported.
Exactly. But even with the best team, there is another hurdle almost every project faces. Funding.
Oh, that's the eternal struggle.
It is. But the handbook encourages you to think outside the box, explore different income sources. Grants are one thing, but it also talks about crowdfunding, tapping into that community spirit, engaging people directly.
Crowdfunding, that's interesting. I've seen it work for creative projects, but for community initiatives.
It can be really effective, but you have to be strategic. You need a well-planned campaign, clear communication about your goals, and a compelling story that resonates with people.
So it's not just about asking for money. It's about inviting people to be part of something bigger.
Right. And you have to be transparent about how the funds will be used, keep people updated. That builds trust and encourages continued support.
Okay, we've talked about burnout funding. But what about pushback from within the community itself? People resisting change, clinging to old ways, or even facing political pressure from outside. How do you handle that?
Those are definitely real concerns, and the handbook addresses them head on. One key thing is community education. It's not enough to just tell people what needs to change. You have to explain why, connect it to their values, show them how it benefits them directly.
So it's showing, not just telling. How do you do that effectively?
Well, the handbook really stresses those tangible examples, the quick wins we talked about earlier. Small, visible victories build trust, demonstrate the positive impact, and start to chip away at that resistance.
So even small successes can help win over skeptics.
Exactly. And it's about meeting people where they are, acknowledging their concerns, finding that common ground, building relationships, having those open dialogues. That's essential for overcoming resistance and creating a shared vision for the future.
It's about inviting people to be part of the solution, not forcing change upon them.
Exactly. And remember, building a strong community is a long game. It takes patience, perseverance, and a willingness to learn and adapt along the way. The handbook gives you a roadmap, but ultimately each community has to chart its own course.
Yeah, it's a journey for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of journeys, I'm really curious about some of those case studies in the handbook. We touched on Mondragon, Totnes, the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement, but there are so many other fascinating examples of communities doing incredible things.
There really are. And one thing that keeps coming back to me is this idea of lessons learned libraries. Capturing and sharing the collective wisdom of a community. Are there any case studies that really exemplify that, where they've documented their experiences and created a blueprint for others? Oh, absolutely. The one that jumps out is Gaviotas in Colombia. It's this eco-village right in the middle of the savannah, and they've meticulously documented their whole journey over 40 years now.
Wow, 40 years. That's dedication. What were some of the unique challenges they faced in that environment?
Well, they were basically building from scratch in a really remote and unforgiving landscape. So they had to get creative with water management, energy production, agriculture.
So no relying on conventional methods. They had to invent their own way of doing things.
Exactly. They became pioneers in things like wind energy, solar water heaters, sustainable forestry. But the thing is, they didn't keep those innovations to themselves. They documented everything, shared it freely with other communities facing similar challenges.
That's incredible. So they're not just building a sustainable community, they're creating a model for others to replicate.
Precisely. They understand that true sustainability is about collective action, about knowledge sharing. Their lessons learned library has become this incredible resource for communities all over the world.
So Gaviota shows us that even in a really challenging environment, you can not only thrive, but also share that knowledge to help others. But I'm also curious about communities tackling challenges in more urban settings.
Yeah.
Any case studies that come to mind there?
Yeah, for sure. The Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston is a great example. It's a really inspiring story of a community that came together to revitalize a neighborhood that had been neglected, marginalized, really struggling.
Right, they face some major obstacles.
Yeah.
What were some of the key things they did to turn things around?
I mean, you name it. Poverty, crime, environmental degradation. But instead of giving up, they took control. They started by developing a comprehensive community plan, laying out their vision for the future.
So taking ownership of their narrative, creating a roadmap for change.
Exactly. They identified key areas they wanted to address: housing, education, economic development. And then they got to work, step by step, building a better future for themselves and their kids.
But it wasn't just about having a plan. It was about putting it into action and learning along the way, right?
Absolutely. And that's where those lessons learned came in. They hit roadblocks, made mistakes, but they learned from every experience, adapted their strategies, built on their successes.
Can you give me an example, like a specific lesson that really shifted their approach?
Well, one of the big ones was the importance of community ownership. Early on, they relied a lot on outside developers to build affordable housing, but they realized that wasn't really serving the community's needs.
So involving the community in those decisions would lead to better outcomes.
Exactly. So they took control of the development process themselves. They formed a community land trust to acquire land and build housing that was truly affordable and responsive to the community's needs.
That's like they recognized a flaw in their approach and course corrected in a way that was really empowering for residents.
Yeah, it was a big turning point. And now their lessons learned library is helping other communities revitalize their neighborhoods in a way that's equitable and sustainable.
So we've got Gaviota showing us the power of innovation and knowledge sharing in a rural setting, and Dudley Street showing us how a community can take control in an urban environment. Both really different contexts, but they both highlight the importance of documenting that journey, creating a blueprint for others.
It's amazing to see how these communities, despite their differences, have converged on this idea of capturing and sharing their lessons learned. It speaks to that collective wisdom, that sense of we're all in this together.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from each other. Are there any other case studies that you think would be valuable to explore? Communities that have tackled really unique challenges?
One that comes to mind is the Aboriginal community of Yarrabah in Australia. They've had some remarkable success addressing social and economic challenges by blending traditional knowledge with modern practices.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What makes their approach so unique?
For decades, Yarrabah really struggled with high unemployment, poverty, a lack of opportunity. But then they shifted their thinking. They started drawing on their rich cultural heritage, their deep connection to the land.
So they created their own path, honoring their values and traditions?
Exactly. They revitalized traditional practices like hunting, fishing, land management, and integrated them with modern economic activities like tourism, sustainable agriculture, and they really emphasized passing on their knowledge to younger generations.
So it's about cultural revitalization as much as economic development.
It's both. And they've had some really innovative programs. One example is their Ranger program, which combines traditional land management techniques with modern science. The Rangers are protecting the environment, managing resources, educating visitors about their culture.
It sounds like they've created a system that's both economically and culturally sustainable. It's really inspiring.
It is. Their story shows the power of drawing on your unique strengths, your cultural heritage, to create solutions that are effective and meaningful. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to community building. Each community has its own gifts and challenges, and the best solutions come from within.
That's such an important point. Embracing diversity, recognizing that there are many paths to building strong communities. I'm so grateful for all these inspiring examples.
Me too. They remind us that change is possible, that even in the face of adversity, communities can create a better future.
It's about tapping into that collective wisdom, sharing our stories, and supporting each other along the way. but I think we've only just scratched the surface of this topic. There's so much more to explore.
There is, and I'm excited to keep digging in and uncover even more practical strategies and inspiring examples.
Wow, it's amazing to hear about all these communities from all over the world, It's really inspiring. But I'm also thinking about the long game. How do these communities keep the momentum going? How do they make sure their efforts last for years, generations even?
That's such a key question, and the handbook actually talks about that specifically. It dedicates a whole chapter to long-term sustainability, and one of the big things it emphasizes is the importance of institutional memory.
Institutional memory.
Oh.
So it's not just about doing the work, it's also about remembering what you learned along the way.
Exactly. It's about documenting everything, the processes, the stories, creating archives, passing on that knowledge to future generations. It's like building a living history of the movement.
That's a cool way to put it. So you don't repeat the same mistakes or have to reinvent the wheel every time there's a new challenge.
Right, exactly. And it's about honoring the legacy of those who came before you. Recognizing their contributions and building on their wisdom.
Almost like creating a community DNA, this thread that connects the past, present, and future. Are there any specific tools or strategies that communities can use to do this?
The handbook has a bunch of suggestions. One is just having really clear record-keeping systems, documenting decisions, projects, outcomes. Another is developing platforms for knowledge sharing. It could be a physical archive, an online database, or even just regular storytelling events where people share their experiences.
So making that knowledge accessible and engaging, weaving it into the fabric of community life. What about those who aren't as tech-savvy? How do you make sure that institutional memory isn't lost as generations change?
That's where mentorship comes in, pairing experienced community leaders with younger generations, creating opportunities for knowledge transfer, passing the torch, so to speak.
It's amazing how these themes keep coming up. Storytelling, mentorship, connection, they really seem to be at the heart of building a truly sustainable and resilient community.
I think you're right. And while preserving the past is crucial, you also have to be looking ahead, anticipating the challenges that are coming. The handbook calls it building adaptive resilience.
So not just bouncing back from setbacks, but actually evolving and becoming stronger because of them. How do you prepare for a future that's constantly changing?
Well, the handbook highlights 3 main areas to focus on: climate impacts, economic shifts, and technological advancements. Those are the forces that are shaping our world, and communities need to be ready to navigate them.
Okay, let's start with climate impacts. Those are definitely top of mind these days. What does the handbook say about building climate resilience?
It's all about a 2-pronged approach: mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is about reducing our impact on the planet. So things like switching to renewable energy, reducing waste, adopting sustainable practices. And then adaptation is about preparing for the changes that are already happening, like strengthening infrastructure, protecting vulnerable populations, developing strategies to deal with extreme weather.
So it's taking responsibility for our environmental footprint, but also acknowledging that the future is going to look different and we need to be ready for it.
Exactly. And the good news is there are tons of communities already doing this, implementing solar projects, creating urban gardens for food security, all sorts of things.
That's encouraging to hear. Okay, so climate resilience is one piece. What about economic shifts? Those could be just as disruptive as any natural disaster.
Absolutely. And the handbook talks about building more localized and resilient economies. Systems that aren't so dependent on global supply chains and are more rooted in community needs.
So supporting local businesses, worker-owned cooperatives, alternative currencies, things like that.
Right. Creating systems that provide a safety net when things get tough and ensure that everyone benefits, not just a few.
It's about taking back control, creating a more sustainable and just economic future for everyone. I love that. Okay, and then there's technological advancements, which are constantly changing everything faster and faster.
And the handbook acknowledges that technology can be a double-edged sword. It can connect us, empower us, help us solve problems, but it can also be used to exploit, divide, and control.
It's all about how we choose to use it, right?
Right. So the handbook encourages communities to be really mindful about how they integrate technology. Make sure it aligns with their values and serves the common good. Use it to enhance human connection, promote sustainability, create a more just world.
Technology serving humanity, not the other way around. That's such a powerful point. Well, this whole conversation has been so insightful and inspiring. I'm really feeling a renewed sense of hope about the future of community building. But before we wrap up, I have one final question for you.
Okay, shoot.
If you could sum up all of this wisdom, all these inspiring examples and practical strategies into one piece of advice for our listeners, what would it be?
Honestly, I think it would be this. Never underestimate the power of collective action. Even a small group of people working together with shared purpose and passion can make amazing things happen. Don't be afraid to start small, to try things out, to dream big. The world needs your ideas, your energy, your commitment. So get out there, connect with your community, and let's build that brighter future together.
Beautifully said. And to all our listeners out there, what's one thing you could do this week to contribute to a more resilient and vibrant community? It doesn't have to be huge. Remember those quick wins we talked about. Plant a seed, connect with a neighbor, share your skills. Every action creates a ripple effect, and those ripples spread. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, but until then, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep building that brighter future together.